Well, welcome back to Up. I'm David Gura. With the Mueller report dropping last night, lots of speculation this morning on the document's length, its contents, possible future ramifications. To put the special counsel's body of work into perspective, we wanted to look back at another high-profile investigation conducted by the former FBI director. We rewind to 2014. That is when the NFL commissioned Robert Mueller to look into the league's handling of the Ray Rice domestic violence incident. Now, at the center of that controversy was video footage of Rice striking his then-fiancée in the elevator of an Atlantic City hotel. After a nearly 4-month probe, the 96-page report, which I have right here, concluded the league should have done more with the information it had, but it also said we found no evidence that the in-elevator video was sent to the league, or if sent, was actually received or viewed by the league. We are joined now by columnist at large Bill Rhoden of ESPN's The Undefeated. And Bill, take us back 2014, 2015. The hope the NFL had that Bob Mueller, portrayed as this independent arbiter of this, was going to come out and give us a sense of what went wrong here if the NFL shirked its responsibilities. And
no, I remember that, and I read that, and I sort of, for those of us in the field of sport and play, and thanks for inviting that, that element here, we thought that finally we had the NFL dead to right on a moral ground, because the NFL's moral compass was broken. And what we didn't know at the time, when the NFL hired Mueller, is that he worked for a firm that had deep roots and connections with the National Football League. They did all kinds of business with the National Football League. What we also did not know then is that there had been a security person who said, you already saw, the NFL, you saw a tape of what Ray Rice did to his then fiancée in the elevator, which the NFL said, we didn't. That's why we only suspended him. And then just suspended him for a couple of games and all that. When this came out, when TMZ made public this awful video of Ray Rice knocking out his girlfriend in the elevator, now all of a sudden, okay, we're going to hire Mueller, who works for a firm, by the way, that does business with the NFL. Now all of a sudden, he's not just suspended, but we're going to banish him. We're going to give him what we now know is a Kaepernick treatment. We're basically going to execute him, you know. But so when we think of, so when I hear about the Mueller report coming out now, and we now go back to 2014, not being too cynical, but we kind of know how this story probably is going to turn out. There's going to be not slapping on the wrist, but because the stakes are higher, but there's going to be, you should have done this, you did this. But if those people who are waiting for something really terrible, like impeachment, or you know, people really do not like the president, think this is going to be it, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Clint, there's a similar narrowness to these two investigations. You look back at this report, it was on Ray Rice, while, as Bill's saying, there was this backdrop of violence in the NFL. There were other issues at play, and I think there was some hope, correct me if I'm wrong here, Bill, that might come to light in this report. Kind of similar in this one as well, Clint, when you look at the narrowness of Bob Mueller's investigative purview.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things I see in the public hysteria around the Mueller report is he's not going to go outside of any of those lanes. He's going to stick very strictly within it. He's also not going to invent rules, and he's not going to admonish people. So this is a difference between when we saw the Clinton email investigation and Director Comey come out and say, well, we're not going to charge, but whoa, you know, this is really terrible. You should never have done it. He isn't going to do that. So this really, I think, points to what we're seeing right now. His lane is pretty narrow. He probably is only going to go so far. He's not going to do it by himself. He's going to do it in conjunction with either Rod Rosenstein or Attorney General Barr. And whenever he moves that forward, he's not going to make up rules or make provisions on his own, meaning if the Attorney General doesn't allow him to do it, he's not going to push the envelope. So if he's not going to push the envelope, then we'll stick with the process. From what I see coming from all of this is the Attorney General saying, this is my summary. Here, Congress, it's your turn. If you want to do an impeachment or not, we don't indict a sitting president.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.